Welcome to a very important lesson on managing hunger. Now, many of you will start with a concept called calorie density, meaning calories per bite of food, allowing people to feel full on fewer calories and build up skills over time. But this is a skill that many of you will be able to incorporate quickly, and most everyone should and will need to eventually incorporate. Managing hunger is a skill, admittedly, I have had a long journey with as a recovering binge eater, and so I hope that this lesson really helps us get back to a mindfulness technique, and a few of them within the overall rubric of managing hunger, that can help in situations in which we are otherwise likely to overeat unless we are aware of and then integrate these concepts. So we are going to be talking about the hunger scale in probably the simplest yet most effective manner you've ever heard. No need for 10 levels and all of that. We're going to simplify it as much as possible. We will discuss hunger in the term that you might not have yet heard, but head hunger, which is early hunger, versus later levels of hunger, stomach hunger. As hunger is not really one thing, there is a spectrum, but 10 levels is a bit much. We will narrow it down and discuss how the early signs are in the head more than in the stomach and how to detect that. We'll discuss a technique called the 1 minute halftime, which for finding out when someone is full as opposed to early on when someone is hungry, is a great, again, simple technique to get a lot more value with less thinking, less effort, less complexity. We'll differentiate hunger and cravings. Remember, they are two different dragons, as you see there, hunger dragon versus craving dragon, but they really can be in cahoots with one another. So managing hunger dragon well will give some benefits and dividends in terms of craving dragon. And then we'll discuss an advanced technique that you may not put into play now, but eventually, and called strategic hunger. First, the hunger scale simplified. Best to think about the hunger scale in terms of our base point as when we're feeling neutral, not hungry, not full. We can all probably grasp onto moments like that, but for the sake of this discussion, hold on to that sensation, where you are actually feeling no sensation of either hunger or fullness that's obvious. If we could take it from that point and delve into hunger, what I would strongly urge everyone to understand is that the early signals of hunger are there for you, but they're not something you will otherwise be aware of unless you know. For most of us, it's cognitive. It's in the head. It is typically a lack of peak attention span. Your attention span starts to drop. You're rereading a sentence once or twice. You're not hangry, but you're not necessarily feeling, although you might be outwardly acting nicely, you're not feeling as nice about comments or things that are going on that might not be 100% going your way. Okay? That is usually the point that for most people early on is a good time to eat until we really learn better control and possibly delve into the advanced technique of strategic hunger. But how do you know this time point where you're at head hunger? I want you to think about it like this. This is one of those scenarios where the signal is so low that you might be distracted by another obligation. You're running an errand, you've got a business obligation, whatever the case may be. What I'd like you to imagine, though, is I come into the screen of your life and I tap on your shoulder, everything else stops, and I say, Margaret, Bob, Randy, Sue, whoever it may be, I would ask you then, would you like your favorite piece of fruit? You can pick whatever that is. Maybe it's strawberries, maybe it's an orange, maybe an apple, a banana, whatever the case may be. At that point, if you are actually even mildly comfortably full, you would probably say no thank you, maybe later. But at the early signs of head hunger, you would probably say, yes, you know what, I would take you up on that. But you wouldn't otherwise think about it until we teach you this mindful mindfulness technique, which I want you to remember, to stop yourself at moments, particularly if it's been more than 2 or 3 hours since you've last eaten, and ask yourself, would you have your favorite piece of fruit right now? And that right there, especially if you're noticing, yeah, you know, my attention span was dropping, my energy level was dropping, I was feeling not irritable, but not quite as comfortable with things not going my way, that would be a great time point in which to eat. Because the next level you'll get to is stomach hunger. After the head, it then starts to drop into the stomach. Then you start to feel a little bit of the stomach rumbling. At that point, we're in a kind of prepare yourself for risk zone. And we might delve into there in the advanced technique we'll talk about. But you certainly don't want to be going from there into high hunger dragon levels of hunger hormones that really take us away from intellectual decision making over food. And understandably so, the biological drive to eat when you get that hungry should turn you into a veritable hunter-gatherer ready to eat whatever you can possibly get your hands on. Unfortunately, in the modern day, that's all too often something that's corporate food derived and not going to serve your why very well. Now, in terms of fullness, and we'll talk about this more as we discuss the 1 minute halftime, the concepts are to try to stop when comfortably full. I'm going to wait until we get to the 1 minute halftime to discuss that a little bit more, but what we want people to try to understand is there's a point in which you're no longer hungry, and that is what those who live in the Longevity Society and the elder cohort of Okinawans do. In Japanese, literally saying eat till only 80% full, which is harahachibu, which would translate in Japanese to eat till only 80% full, where they find that zone where they're no longer hungry, they've satisfied their hunger, but they're really just comfortably full. They're really just, if anything, gotten rid of their hunger and not necessarily, and certainly aren't stuffed, but what we would describe as mildly, just comfortably full. Then there's medium, slightly stuffed, and then there's coma. That's as simple as a hunger scale needs to get. 3 levels above neutral, 3 levels below neutral. We don't need 10 levels and of 5 above neutral, 5 below. That's just too much. Doesn't really help. So as we have discussed, and it's worth reiterating because this is a course in which we want repetition is the mother of learning to be respected. Let's recall mild early hunger in the head, not the stomach, attention span dropping, starting to feel a little tired, losing patience, rereading sentences more than once. At that point, ask yourself, would I eat a piece of my favorite fruit? You have now discovered where head hunger is, and probably most of the time, the best time to eat, because when hunger gets too out of control, we end up overcompensating out of respect of our history as humans of feast or famine, and trying to stuff as much as we can in preparation for an inevitable lack of food over the seasons or even an all-out famine, which of course isn't going to happen anymore. Now, to reiterate the 1 minute halftime. This is a great way to learn when comfortably full, and is probably best at least initially visualized, because we want something concrete, not abstract, as if you're in a restaurant. You're in a high-risk situation for overeating, a buffet, restaurant, whatever the case may be, but it's nice to think about it in terms of a restaurant with your typical 2 to 3 portion sizes more than we actually need. And this is one of those kind of scenarios in which I really emphasize I love food. I am a foodie. When somebody tells me to put my utensils down, chew 45.6 times, and then hate your life, that's not a technique that's going to work. When the food comes out, it's hot, it's pleasurable, eat it at your pace. You eat it fast, eat it slow, do whatever you want. Because without that satisfaction and making peace with food and finding love of food that is also compatible with your health, we're really not going to have anything sustainable. I will ask you though, one time, somewhere around halfway through the meal, to take that 1 minute halftime. And it can be one moment. It doesn't have to be timed exactly to a minute. It doesn't have to be exactly halfway through the meal, but it's nice to think about it as a 1 minute halftime. In other words, halfway through the meal, put the utensils down once, and just for a moment, a minute, if you will, take a sip of water and focus on how you're feeling. Are you eating just because the food is there and someone in your life said finish your plate, the people starving in China, and all types of nonsensical things that don't apply to today, plus our plates have gotten much bigger? Or are you really potentially comfortably full? And even beyond that, remember that fullness signaling may take several minutes to kick in. Can you feel the oncoming train of fullness? In other words, can you avoid overstuffing and knowing that you are probably going to feel even fuller in 10 to 20 minutes? Might we stop now? Might we ask for a container to take the other half home and actually save ourselves not only calories but money? And I will tell you this, keep in mind that, let's just say, for instance, of a large meal, the first half will keep you full for about 2 to maybe 3 hours. Do not think that the second half is going to keep you full for another 2 to 3 hours. You get diminishing returns. You will, let's say, be full for another hour, 45 minutes or an hour for the second half. So it makes really good sense to stop early, and you can end up by spreading your meals throughout the day and using this technique of eating when early hungry, stopping when comfortably full, and ending up feeling satisfied over and above the techniques we're going to show you regarding calorie density, protein, and fiber for less calories over the day. Here's the 1 minute halftime at work, and this actually happened just a few days ago. I was here at Oakland University, and we had a wonderful meal at a restaurant that's on campus. I tweaked it to my liking, and we won't worry about all those details regarding salt and things on the side and so forth, but just take a look at the plate. You don't see that half was left over, but that's my point. I did stop halfway through and thought about, how do I feel? And I said, you know, I'm still a little bit hungry. So I went a little bit further, but then I was engaged in a mindfulness process that allowed me to stop. And yes, everything you see on the right, I didn't throw away. I saved it for a snack later. And that is how the 1 minute halftime works in real time. You may stop at half, you may eat a little bit more, but whatever's happening, at least you're mindfully engaged in your body's physiology rather than being manipulated by the environment through this mindfulness technique. Well, maybe this is funnier for you Game of Thrones fans. I'll admit that is a guilty pleasure of mine and my wife's to watch Game of Thrones, but here we go. Hunger dragon versus craving dragon. Keep in mind that what we're talking about is managing hunger. Just because somebody's hunger is managed does not mean that we won't have cravings. Let's face it, we all know that we've had times where we feel, I'm absolutely stuffed at a restaurant. I couldn't eat another thing, until they come with the dessert tray. And then all of a sudden, well, maybe I'll have that. And that's something related to what's called sensory-specific satiety. In other words, you are full, sure, of your vegetables, your protein, your good-tasting savory stuff, but you still haven't had anything sweet yet. Okay. Preview, teaser, finish with fruit. That's the best way to finish sweet. But nevertheless, you still have some satisfaction to serve in the sweet category for many of us, and we would still find room for that. So that being said, believe me though, craving dragon is far more rambunctious when it's playing with hunger dragon. So while hunger management can't answer craving dragon completely, it can certainly tame it significantly. You manage hunger dragon well, then you as a warrior can focus on one dragon, craving dragon, and you'll be surprised how much you will gain in terms of success in that arena, in terms of how often you might have, how much you might have of it. You will really tame craving dragon quite well. Tame your dragon. More like the cartoon you see there than the flaming dragons of Game of Thrones. Okay. Now we're to an advanced skill, and I want to discuss strategic hunger because sometimes this can be a technique to break a plateau or pay the piper while interest rates are low, as I like to say. But I want to emphasize with strategic hunger that hunger is not to be feared, it's to be respected, and in and of itself is not a problem. I mean, to be honest, of course, as you're hungry, you are actually burning fat. And as long as it doesn't go on and on and on, you're not going to really put much muscle at risk, but the risk is that we end up overcompensating later. That's the risk. It's not that the hunger is the problem and that your metabolism will slow and all of that. That's a bunch of mythical, really not serious understanding-based level of discussion. The hunger risk is that we end up overcompensating because of biological drive to eat from hunger hormones. That's the risk, not the hunger in and of itself. So if we can manage hunger well, we can delve into medium, or level 2 if you will, levels of hunger here and there, but it usually requires a context, okay, with planning, intent, Today's a strategic hunger day. You know it's going to be a relatively well stress managed day. It's pretty much well planned out. And you have your food near you, your foods that fix, right? Your high serving Y foods ready. Your fruits, vegetables, beans, lentils, peas, your smart proteins, fiber, all of that, it's ready. You've got a food bag with you, okay? You are going to carefully allow yourself, if you are already attuned to head hunger, okay, that's fine. Now I'm going to go into a zone where I'm going to take some advantage of hunger and know that I'm burning fat, and just be ready for where it drops into medium hunger right into the stomach. I'll let it go. I'll drink my water. I'm mindfully ready. I've got my food at the ready. Once it drops into the stomach starts to feel it, maybe a little rumble. This is where I'd like you to then pull that trigger. You probably would have pulled it earlier than that, usually, based on our early discussion to eat when we're head hungry, but allow it to go. Maybe this is an extra 15, 30 minutes into stomach hunger, but don't wait too long because there's not a gap that's very large between that stomach hunger and then hunger dragon, level 3, the high level. Okay. Extra caution here for binge eaters, though I have utilized this technique as a recovering binge eater. It usually requires some time, and it's best to stick with eating at head hunger level if you're a binge eater early on. It's best to really grasp that eating when early hungry, stopping when comfortably full first, and then maybe at some point in the future carefully delving into this concept of strategic hunger with all of the planning that we're discussing here. So what we're talking about is delving a little bit from the mild, that head hunger zone that we talked about is usually the best time to eat so things don't get out of control, into that medium stomach hunger zone. And just keeping in mind that there's a narrow window there. For me, it may just be 5 minutes between stomach hunger and hunger dragon. As a binge eater, that's for me the case. For you, it might be a little bit longer, so you have to really shape this for your own personal needs. Okay, winding up here in hunger management. Again, hunger is to be respected. It's not a problem. You're actually burning fat during that time. It's the overcompensation of getting too hungry that's the risk. You burn 200 extra calories hungry, then you end up overcompensating with 2,000 calories with that hunger dragon biological drive to eat and hunger hormone effect. You want to learn to detect it early. We've talked about head hunger. You'll have to find your cue, whether it's a little bit lower energy, your attention span, but it's typically something in the head. That's when you want to stop and ask yourself, would I have, for instance, among other things, of course, but the simple thing to ask as you're learning this, would I have my favorite piece of fruit right now? And though you might not have in your previous lifestyle thought that you were hungry enough, or that you were hungry now that you realize had hunger, maybe you go ahead and have a healthy snack at that point, especially if it's not already time to eat or a meal time per se. Of course, if it is, then please go off and then take care of it in that manner. Use the 1 minute halftime for finding out we're comfortably full. Now, you saw the picture, but the concept is pretty simple. It's not all complicated with putting utensil down each time, chewing some odd many times. Enjoy your food as it comes out, but one time, somewhere about halfway, take a moment. Take a sip of water. Think about how you're feeling. Maybe you can save the rest. You know the last half of the meal isn't going to keep you full as long as the first half will. You can save your health, money, many things by using the 1 minute halftime. And as you saw in the picture, you may decide to eat a little bit more, but then you'll be doing it based on your physiology, not on being manipulated by an environmental cue around you. Okay? Have fun with this. The power of being reconnected, that empowerment, is so strong. I can't emphasize enough how nice it is in a world that's trying to manipulate us to really gather our control and refocus on our own internal cues that we were actually born with, to leverage them and to find health and wellness through that route. Okay? And remember, we're playing around here, so you got to be forgiving. Progress is perfection. Remember, we're not talking about strictness here. It's about improving the averages over a lifetime. I do want to add one point, because many of you may be thinking, well, what about drinking all this water? We've heard that's the best thing to do. Water is healthy and hydrating is right for many reasons, but the data on water and hunger management is way less than the hype about it. So the hype about water for weight management is way outpaces the actual science. There is an exception there in the sense of drinking water that just prior to a meal, because remember, thin liquids just go through the stomach too quickly. But there's a narrow window. While they go through the stomach too quickly, generally speaking, to help manage hunger, since you're about to eat, drinking a glass of water just prior to eating and ordering may actually help to some degree, and so I don't want to discount that. But as you'll learn, when it comes down to the concept of calorie density and how many calories there are per bite of food, the real place the water can help us in terms of controlling calories is when it is in the food itself. There was a little teaser, a little sneak peek for an upcoming lesson, and here we'll wind up our lesson on hunger management.